Alrighty. Hello there. My name is Brendan McKeegan. I will be presenting on the international brigades in the Spanish Civil War. So before we dive into the international brigades themselves, I feel it's important to kind of outline the Spanish Civil War itself. So due to the Great Depression, the Spanish economy greatly suffered, and in 1931, in line with other liberal countries, the King of Spain, Alfonso XIII, authorized the implementation of elections to organize a Spanish government. King Alfonso was voted out of power. He fled the country of Spain, and following his departure, a more liberalized form of government took its place. And just to note, the King Alfonso left the country of Spain because he felt as though that there was a high possibility that there was a revolt against him and his family. So in following that, in 1936, a very leftist majority took control of the Spanish government, and angered by this, fascist and right-wing military groups staged a coup to take over the country. However, this initial coup was a failure, and this caused the Spanish Civil War to ensue or begin. So the Spanish Civil War went from 1936 to 1939. It's often seen as a precursor to the Second World War, as it was fought between fascists and anti-fascists. Those who fought on the side of the Republic had pretty different views. Some were pro-monarchy, some were conservative, some were liberal, some were socialists, and some were communists. Actually, a majority of the people on the Republic had communist views. This is important to highlight because it does show that this was in fact a anti-fascist front, and nationalists, or they're often referred to as rebels in a lot of texts, held strict right-wing ideologies. This fascist movement was supported by Nazi Germany and fascist Italy at the time. An important figure, General Francisco Franco, promoted many Catholic teachings during this time in order to gain support from the Catholic Church for the nationalist movement, and they did, in fact, get the support of the Catholic Church during this time. So some major events that occurred in this war, start out with, we have the militia group in 1936, revolt in Morocco. And I previously mentioned Francisco Franco. He declared war at the start of the rebellion, at this time. And Franco was on the Canary Islands, actually. So this was broadcasted via radio. And then I also previously mentioned fascist Italy and Nazi Germany. They come to aid the nationalist rebels. However, in October of 1936, the First International Brigade joins the Republican Popular Front in Spain. The international brigades posed kind of a problem to the nationalists. They took part in defending the city of Madrid for 28 months before its fall, so it really did slow down the nationalists' attempt to take over Spain. While the international brigades helped the Republicans, it wasn't quite enough. The nationalist rebels took control of the majority of Spain by about the end of 1937, but still did not have full control over the major cities of Barcelona or Madrid. The Battle of Ebro was kind of the deciding factor for the Republican Army. They were defeated, and it kind of marked the closing moments of the Spanish Civil War. And after that, nationalist troops took over Madrid, and then General Francisco Franco became the dictator of Spain until 1975. So moving on from there, I wanted to highlight some the important role of propaganda in the Spanish Civil War. And this played an important role on both sides, both the nationalists and the Republicans. Franco employed lots of religious propaganda to appeal to Spain's large Catholic population and also to the Vatican See, just to kind of hopefully gain their help and support in a more global sense. Republican propaganda was kind of targeted at foreign allies that oppose the views of fascism. The Republican front had hopes that posters such as the one on the right, where you can see, would inspire allies to join the war. In a way, it did, but the Republicans needed more help in a grander scale from these countries. And by the end of the war, nationalists were able to gain full control over the press and other cinematic types of press, and they would continue to advertise for Spanish citizens. So getting to the international brigades themselves, I kind of want to go over what made up the international brigades. They were volunteers from around the world, over 50 countries in total, I believe 54 was the actual number. They were organized by the Communist International Organizations, which has connections to the Soviet Union. And their goal essentially was to unite the world under one union. So yeah, during this time, lots of refugees escaped from surrounding fascist-controlled countries such as Germany, Italy, Hungary, and they fled to Spain to join the international brigades. And because of the community international organizational skills, most volunteers were either communists or became communists after serving in Spain. And in total, there were 7 brigades that were often divided by nationality. A couple examples include the British Brigade, which was from Britain, and the Abraham Lincoln American Brigade, which was from the United States of America. And after the Battle of Ebro, in a last-ditch effort to get more aid from major countries around the world with hopes that a fascist Spain would scare the major powers in the world, the international brigades were withdrawn from Spain, and with hopes that other countries would fill in the gap. However, this did not occur, and the Republican front lost this civil war. So I included some quotes about the brigades. The first one is from Madeleine Albright, and she said that volunteers from 54 countries, including 3,000 from the United States, formed international brigades to assist in the cause. I like this quote because it points out the sheer involvement from around the world to prevent the spread of fascism in Europe at this time. The next quote that I included was from Ernest Hemingway, and he said, "If you lose a war, you lose everything, and your ideology will not save you." This quote I included because it accurately depicts the stakes at hand in this civil war, and because Ernest Hemingway did in fact get to see some of the events that occurred, and he ended up writing a book based on some of the events of the Spanish Civil War. The last quote that I have here is by Peter N. Carroll, and he said, "The Spanish Civil War and the fight against it did in part alert the world to the nature of fascism. The story of Abraham Lincoln Brigade is generally known. It was a contingent of committed Black and white Americans, 3,000 in number, who went to fight against fascism." I like this quote because it shows how the Civil War and the international brigade's involvement in the Spanish Civil War was a precursor to World War II. It was a war that affected people globally, fighting for and against fascism, and I thought that was a really neat quote. So some notable conflicts that the international brigades took part in. I've listed out a few of them here. The Battle of Madrid lasted for about 2.5 years. It was the primary focus and end goal for Francisco Franco, but an international brigade from Germany, Italy, some parts of Scandinavia, France, and Belgium, I believe, were able to hold off the nationalist groups for a significant amount of time. I believe it ended up lasting for about 2.5 years. Sorry. And then moving on from there, we have the Battle of Jamara. This was an extremely deadly conflict. The nationalist group tried to gain control of territory across the Jamara River, and the Republican front held its ground. Advances from both sides were unsuccessful. However, at the end of this conflict, the nationalists did cross the river, and they weren't able to get into the Madrid-controlled Republican area at that point yet. A brigade that took part in that battle was the Abraham Lincoln Brigade of the United States. They lost a lot of troops in that battle, partly due to inexperience, but also just the sheer force that the Nationalists were able to use against the Republican front. The Battle of Guadalajara involved lots of heavy support from Italian fascists at the time. They were largely successful until the international brigades from the 11th and 12th units were able to assist the Republican front. This was kind of one major turning point for the Republicans during this time, and it was a very important victory that kind of boosted morale and in general. Yeah. The Battle of Ebro was a very critically important war, I'd say, for the international brigades and the Republican front. But the Nationalist Army had a much more offensive strategy, and they dominated this battle. This is kind of seen, as I mentioned before, that this was like the final defeat of the Republican front, and the international brigades were called back and withdrawn from Spain. So kind of the end of the brigades, the international brigades greatly aided the Republican effort to prevent fascism from spreading throughout Europe. But the strength of both, however, the strength of both combined was not simply enough to stop the nationalist movement. Nearly 26,000 members of the various brigades died, which indicates the major toll this civil war had, not only on a national level, but on a global level as well. And I thought an interesting thing to include was that instead of going home, some members of the brigades were awarded citizenships, and they were integrated into the Popular Front Army kind of during and after the Battle of Ebro. This was partially due to the fact that there was a high amount of refugees that were coming in through the area, and they could not go back to where they came from, and Spain was their only option. So yeah, thank you so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day.